We take the conversation further, and as we continue, we turn our focus to education now. How has government handled the impact of COVID-19 on education? On this, I'm joined by Equal Education General Secretary Noncedo Madubedube. Noncedo, good evening, and thank you for your time. How do you first receive the news that not all the grades are returning to school today? We saw a reduced number. That decision on its own, how do you receive it as Equal Education? But what does it tell us in terms of how that department is handling this reopening of schools?
Yeah. So look, I think as an organization and as a social movement, we believe that the department's plans and the implementation thus of should be impacted by and informed, rather, by the school community. So it's good, and we are relieved that the ministers decided post that joint meeting with the provincial MECs to let in or phase in a smaller group of learners, because the reality of the matter is that in most sort of the more urban provinces, including then the different municipalities in the Eastern Cape, are now facing huge increases, an upward spiral or trend of COVID positive cases. And so we're really happy that less learners are going in. Initially, it was projected that over 56% of learners in South Africa would be back at school today. And that's dropped to a little under 20%. And we think that's a much more sort of manageable amount of folks to have back in school. And the reasons that we think this is good is because we're worried about the competencies of different provincial departments of education and national department of education in rolling out the non-negotiables at different schools. We are still experiencing circumstances where our members and our organizing staff are coming back to us and saying, look, the procurement of personal protective equipment isn't up to scratch. There's still no water security in schools inside Limpopo in the Eastern Cape. There are challenges around adequate and safe sanitation facilities in many schools across the country. And I think one of the most important ones for us in particular is the provision and the immediate rollout of the National School Feeding Scheme. So these types of challenges make it difficult for us to believe that over 50% of learners in South Africa can be back inside the school environment, for lack of a better word, right now.
Yeah, we didn't get as much detail in this briefing as we did the previous briefing, but we do know that there are still rural schools that are still not open because of water issues.
Yeah, I mean, you need to say that again. This last briefing was a little bit disappointing. The MECs used their periods of reporting back to affirm the National Department of Education, instead of using that period to take into confidence the different school communities across the country, to tell us about the lessons learned from the previous phase-in of the grade 7s and 12s, talk to us about the challenges and how they plan to address those challenges inside specific timelines, so that parents can start objectively, with less sort of emotion, make decisions about whether their kids are ready to go back to school or not. But that wasn't the case in that briefing. And so what we're still sort of hoping for is that the Department of Basic Education and provinces, together with the NECT, I think some creativity and a more robust and mass public education platform must be created to take the country into its confidence. Because at the moment, what happens is that after every joint meeting between the unions and the departments of basic education, we get mixed messages from people that have been inside those discussions, which leave the rest of the country in quite a vulnerable position. And/or we have traditional media that is using, I don't know, sort of different impact actions on the ground to sensationalize a portion of what's going on inside the school community. And it's the department's responsibility to give us a better sense of what principals inside schools and the school management teams experience our time in doing during this period.
More disappointing for me, Noncedo, is the fact that the monitoring of the impact of the return of the other grades, grade 7s and grade 12s, was not monitored. So we don't have data to say how did that reopening impact on the infection rate, but also on the spread of the virus.
I imagine it's difficult for anyone to get a sense of where exactly they could have contracted COVID, right? Especially in working class communities where learners walk long distances, where communities in fact don't have the capacity to physically distance. So, I mean, no one can say whether someone got it inside the school community or not. But one thing that we must say is that NECT is forming part of a monitoring group for the Department of Basic Education. And Mr. Gordon Khoza, during yesterday's briefing, talked to us a little bit about the small sample size they'd spoken to through principals in different schools and what they understood as experiences. But the funny part about this is that they talked to us about the recommendations that are given to the Department of Basic Education. And it's clear that there are still massive issues around water security and sanitation. Now, these things are non-negotiables, not by Angie Motshekga's standards. Community, you must ensure that there's water, there's soap, hygiene practices, an ability for learners to physically distance, so in additional classrooms and teachers, and all of these things are the things that aren't quite in place in all schools, and this is why we've got public actions flaring up across the country. And those things, I think the MECs yesterday turned a blind eye to, and those aren't the things that are going to take school communities in confidence. So, I mean, we're cautiously happy that there's a smaller group back in school today, and we're going to be monitoring how that process has gone through our membership base, which are learners. But we do want the public to actively talk to their HODs, to their MECs, using social media, formal platforms via email and call to ensure that the school closest to you is a safe environment for learners to go back into.
Right. I'm hoping the line will hold, Noncedo. If it doesn't, unfortunately, we'll leave it there. But you conducted a sample study of some sort with the learners returning to school. What were some of the surprises for you that you picked up?
One of the big things, I didn't want to call it a surprise, it was just hurtful, was the lack of access to school nutrition, or to food rather. And this was inside the first parts of a lockdown period. Many learners said if they had the opportunity to go to school and pick up food, they'd do that. And this is why we launched an urgent case against the different departments of education for school nutrition. The second thing that we picked up is that learners, although they were happy that there is some form of support for learning at home through TV and radio, but the blended learning approach was so foreign and not interactive enough for learners to grasp the lessons that they were needing to take on. So we worry about the perpetuation of inequalities inside the schooling system. Some have been learning virtually online. Teachers are able to set up those kinds of classrooms, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and all that. But most learners that are inside quintile 1 to 3 schools are sitting dark waiting for their teachers to respond to them through exercises via WhatsApp groups, and maybe some even Facebook groups. So the learner support is a huge element of what we're concerned about. The last, before I think you go somewhere else, is that psychosocial support seems super critical right now. And I think every time the department speaks about it, it's like a brazed over thing. Civil society will assist with this. There isn't effort in thinking about geographically mapping out which organizations inside civil society will be supporting this practice. Is the DSD on board? How do learners reach these kinds of services? Are teachers aware? Because as soon as you go into schools that are closing down or boycotting, you'll find that teachers are using the facades of active, progressive parents and community groups to close these schools down because they themselves are compelled by Labor Relations Acts to not act against the state, but are feeling quite traumatized inside schools. So that's something that's crucial, I think, that we need to prioritize during this period.
Noncedo, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us tonight. Noncedo Madubedube, General Secretary of Equal Education.